Well, welcome to the Fantasy Football Forge. My name is Steve, and the trade deadline just passed. Trick-or-treaters are coming in about an hour and a half. So, things are happening today. I hope you had a good Halloween. I hope you gave as much candy away as you can if you are an adult. And if you are young enough to continue to still trick-or-treat, then I hope you went and got as much freaking candy as you could. Trade deadline just happened. Things did happen, and some of it will be fantasy relevant directly, some of it maybe a little bit less obvious, but all of it should have, I think, some impacts here or there. So let's cover that, and then we'll look at my Week 8 recap, how I did last week with my DFS buys for specifically DraftKings is what I look at, and I will have my DFS buys at the end of this video for this upcoming week, as well as how I did with my Levums and my Fatums. What happened today? Joshua Dobbs got traded to Minnesota from the Arizona Cardinals, and the plan, according to Minnesota, is to start Jaren Hall, which is good because that is how I ranked it, and so they will keep Josh Dobbs in the wings for a week. I assume he'll probably be starting in 2 weeks, and if that is the case, unless Jaren Hall comes out and he's great, that will be good for all of the playmakers in Minnesota that Joshua Dobbs is going to come in and help out there. As far as Arizona's starting quarterback situation goes, we already knew that it was supposed to be Clayton Tune or Kyler Murray. Now we know for sure that it's not going to be Josh Dobbs again. This means that Kyler Murray is going to be activated. It has to mean that Kyler Murray will be activated this week for the game, and I find it really hard to imagine that they would sit him behind a late round rookie draft pick from, this year with 0 NFL experience. Either way, whoever's starting, it's kind of getting shoved into not the greatest situation because they're going to be going up against Cleveland this weekend, so that kind of sucks. So there's how that unravels. Then when we look at a trade between Detroit and the Cleveland Browns, Detroit traded for wide receiver Donovan Peoples-Jones, somebody that can help them out on the perimeter a little bit more. This is, I think, a net positive for everybody, from the quarterback on down to your running backs for this offense. The guys who you were starting, the only one who you may have been starting, Josh Reynolds, I think would be a downgrade for him. But otherwise, I think it makes for a better team. He's kind of a new flavor for them to work with, and so I like it for them. Washington, the Commanders traded away 2 pretty big assets, got, I think, a second and a third round draft pick for them respectively, and they traded those away to San Francisco. So that San Francisco defense has not been one that you're necessarily too afraid to start players against. They've been okay as a defense. I would expect that to maybe change going forward. Should be maybe closer to the San Francisco defense that we came in fearing to play players against. And then Chicago got one of their other guys. I think Chicago got Montez Sweat. San Fran got Buffalo Bills traded with the Green Bay Packers for defensive back Rasul Douglas. Buffalo's probably going to use him along the boundary. I think that's where he thrives the best at. So this does help, I believe, probably, that Buffalo defense that has had a lot of injuries. Still been pretty solid. And this should help pick that unit up for wide receivers going up against them, make it a little bit harder. Jacksonville Jaguars for the last trade here traded with the Minnesota Vikings for offensive guard Ezra Cleveland, who is an all-around good blocker. This doesn't necessarily help the passing game or the running game any more than it helps the other one. And so that should just help this offense to maybe be that much better going forward. That's going to bring us to our Week 8 recap. On the not dirt cheap end, I gave you Jared Goff last week. That was no bueno, did not work out. And then down in the bargain bin, I gave you 2 names at 5,600 DK bucks. I gave you Brock Purdy, and at 5,200 gave you Sam Howell. And Purdy had an okay fantasy day, so he did okay. And Sam Howell was the quarterback 1 on the week, so obviously that would have worked out really well. And I did pretty darn well for my Lovums and my Fatums as well. I loved Dak Prescott. He finished as the quarterback 3 on the week. And I faded Jordan Love. He finished as the quarterback 18 on the week. He did okay, but obviously he was not an asset to help you win your week. With that, let's move on to my Week 9 quarterback rankings. And we'll go through these in tiers, and you can see my first tier, I have 8 quarterbacks. These are my must-start guys. There's really no need to explain why they are must-starts. Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Justin Herbert, Tua Tagovailoa, Dak Prescott, and Joe Burrow in at quarterback. 8, believe Joe Burrow has probably returned, but they are facing Buffalo, which still has been a really good defense overall along on this season against quarterbacks. What I do want to quick introduce you to is you are seeing in the middle of everything on this chart here are my projections, an expected range that you can expect these guys to score within, from a below average game to an above average game, based on what they've done so far this season and based on what the defense that they're facing has done so far this season. And red is good, blue is bad, white is going to be average, and way over here where I have this highlighted next to the player names is my player temperature gauge, which is essentially a matchup gauge based on the skill level of the quarterback themselves and the matchup. How likely is it that they take advantage of the matchup and have a big week? Or in the case if you saw blue there, how likely is it that they might have a poor week or not be able to have an average to above average type of week, is how to think of that. So let's move on to my second tier of wide receivers, where we will start to talk about these players quite a bit more. This is where you're really starting to have to make decisions, and that starts off at my quarterback 9 with Sam Howell. The Washington Redskins have had the 4th most pass attempts per game. Sam Howell has the 5th most air yards and the 6th most passing touchdowns. And when you combine those 3 things, not only do you get a top 5 floor kind of guy, you also get a top 5 ceiling type of player. The only reason that he's not in that first tier for me is because I would have a slightly easier time trying to argue any of the guys that I have ranked below him in this tier, starting them over him, than I would have saying you should start Sam Howell over Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott, etc. If this were a different matchup, if this was Philadelphia maybe instead of New England, maybe I could start to make some of those arguments a little bit easier, and it'd be harder to argue for any of these other guys over him. So that is a part of it. New England is a poor but not bad quarterback matchup. Let's move on to my number 10 quarterback this week, which is CJ Stroud, going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who have been a top 10 quarterback matchup. So that is a good thing for CJ Stroud. The ceiling is not great for him, but the floor is excellent. In fact, my expected floor has the same expected floor as Sam Howell does, right ahead of him. And that's going to bring us to my quarterback number 11 in Derek Carr. And starting him that it could turn out poorly. You're probably not going to feel the most comfortable going into the week starting him, but it's hard to imagine that he has a bust game going up against Chicago. It's a little bit easier to imagine it now that they've added Montez Sweat. And that's going to bring us on to quarterback number 12, and that is Jordan Love. And it's an okay matchup this week going against the Rams. And regardless of how bad he plays in real-world football, Jordan Love consistently doesn't put up bad fantasy days. He is still a borderline quarterback 1 on the season at this point in time. I've had a hard time not ranking Baker Mayfield ahead of him. Expect me to possibly make that change as the week goes along. One thing to think about with this Jordan Love matchup, and I don't know if this is good or bad for Jordan Love specifically, but going up against the Los Angeles Rams, these head coaches know each other quite well. And with that, they're going to know each other's schemes and which one of them is going to be able to break the mold or find the thing that helps them to win the matchup against the other team. I don't know, but one of them might be able to get some sort of advantage with their familiarity with each other. But that's going to bring us on to Baker Mayfield, my quarterback number 13. And Baker actually has a higher floor than Sam Howell and CJ Stroud do, who I just touted how high their floors were. I would feel very comfortable playing Baker Mayfield this week. His ceiling, unfortunately, is not fantastic at all. Still, you put a middling quarterback up against a middling matchup, and I expect a solid week from Baker Mayfield. At quarterback 14, we have Kyler Murray. Like I said, I am expecting him to probably be the starter this week. I had him ranked prior to all that news and that thought line. I just figured I would rank him first because I'm not going to be able to rank Clayton Tune. I'm not going to be able to outrank him. I won't be able to give him any kind of projections, so I figured I might as well at least project Kyler Murray out, and then once we get more news, I'll act upon that news. So there's no guarantee that Kyler Murray even plays this weekend. Part of his projections are based on his career data. And one thing that I did with that data is I basically lowered it a little bit because defenses have seemingly had the advantage against quarterbacks this year. But my biggest fear for Kyler Murray in his first game back, but just maybe in general going forward, will be the rushing. How much are they going to be willing to possibly get him injured? Because I think they want to at least keep the door open to trade him and pick a quarterback in this draft, even though they're not going to ever publicly say that. First game back in like a year with all that rust, I would really like to have that safe floor with his rushing capabilities, and I just don't know for sure that that's going to be something that they're going to want to lean on. He's also playing against the Cleveland Browns. As I mentioned earlier, they're a bottom 5 quarterback matchup. I'm almost certainly ranking him too high at this point in time, and we'll have to lower him, but I don't think that it's going to be by more than 1, maybe 2 spots. So if he plays, I've had him in my IR spot like all season. I will probably be rolling him out there, hoping for the best and half expecting the worst. To give you an idea of how I feel about Kyler Murray, it's a boom-bust kind of situation. I don't even know how much boom there is there, which is why I don't know where I'll end up ranking him. Let's move on to my quarterback 15 with Bryce Young. And we've seen Bryce Young get incrementally better week in and week out. And last week, he spread the ball around a little bit more, and he saw him start to get Jonathan Mingo going a little bit more. Indy is the best, 4th best quarterback matchup for quarterbacks, and it just feels like this could be the week that he begins to really turn that corner. And so that is why I gave Bryce a love him from me this week, which is going to bring us to one of my fatums at quarterback 16 in Gardner Minshew. And last week I was alone on an island by not pumping up CJ Stroud because of the matchup going up against Carolina, which I think was why everybody loved him so much, but that made no sense. Teams like to, they want to, and they typically do run up and down against Carolina, and thus the quarterbacks against Carolina haven't really had very great games. I'm not really too high on Gardner Minshew because I'm not afraid of this Indianapolis rushing attack not being able to get it going. They've been great all season, and as I said last week, I think Carolina is the worst run defense in the league, and so I don't think they're going to have to pass the ball a whole lot in this game, unless, of course, Bryce Young really does totally turn that corner and has a fantastic game. Then maybe this would be more of a balanced attack from Indianapolis, something like that. I would avoid Gardner Minshew if possible. He has performed quite well, and that is why I still do have him ranked this highly and in that tier. Let's move on to the third last important tier, my tier 3, which begins with Geno Smith. Some of these will be very, very quick talking about them, but for Geno Smith, it's amazing to me that Geno Smith is still being ranked as highly as he is via the ECR based on the one good year that he had last season. I think he's getting too much credit for that. The ECR has him at quarterback 13 right now on the week, even though he's been the quarterback 24 according to my EV, which is basically on average per week, but it takes consistency into account. And he is facing the single worst quarterback matchup on the season in the Baltimore Ravens. So you take those two factors in, and he's getting ranked 13th. Makes absolutely zero sense. I think I'm giving him too much credit by having him ranked 17th, but look at who's behind him. It isn't a pretty week at the quarterback position. It's not a pretty quarterback picture right behind him anyways, so this is where I have him ranked. Let's move on to my wider quarterback 18 in Will Levis, and it's not a good quarterback matchup for him going up against Pittsburgh. The pressure could certainly cause issues for him. Might see pressure like he's never seen before in his life going up against this Pittsburgh front. But I do want to say I really do love the matchup or the matching of his skill set along with a Derrick Henry specifically led Tennessee Titans offense, that run and gun type of offense. I'm willing to risk it for the biscuit with Will Levis this week, given all of the quarterbacks that I do have ranked behind him, but understand it could be a really, really bad week too for Will Levis. Then at quarterback 19, we have Mac Jones, and he's ranked this high because Washington is the second best quarterback matchup, and they just got rid of 2 of their pass rushers. I had him ranked here. I might move him up ahead of Will Levis just because, maybe even Geno Smith as well, just because those pass rushers aren't there anymore. That's a pretty big deal and is really going to make it a lot easier for teams to move the ball on that defense that already suffered outside of that pass rush. Then at quarterback 20, we have Desmond Ridder. You know what? We're just going to do that. I think I'm probably going to end up committing to that. And I'll shuffle that after the video. So at quarterback 20, I have Desmond Ridder, and he may not even be the starter this week, but whoever is the starter gets an okay matchup going up against the Minnesota Vikings. But also, it's probably just going to be like a lot of running in that game, Atlanta versus Minnesota, as much as they can against each other. Yeah, that's probably not going to be a fun game to watch. Then at quarterback 21, I have Daniel Jones. Las Vegas is a surprisingly poor quarterback matchup. The thing that made you feel safe about Daniel Jones, kind of like what I was talking about with Kyler Murray, is that rushing floor, the capacity that he had in the rushing game. And it's tough to think that they're going to go ahead and have him just run all free willy-nilly and probably have it in his head that they don't want him to run, and it's probably in his own head that he doesn't want to run coming off of that major neck injury. So I'm not really expecting a great week from Daniel Jones. And at quarterback 22, we have Zach Wilson, and it is the single best quarterback matchup, and you would like to think that Zach Wilson will be able to at least get a middling day out of that. And I think he probably will. That 15.7 points that he's got at the upper end of this expected range, I think he can do that. He did that last week pretty much. The only thing is, earlier in the season, after he had a really good game against really good defense, he had a bad defensive matchup, tried putting some faith in him then, and it absolutely failed. He's really, really tough to trust. Originally, my love of the week, but I chose to have two because there are reasons to doubt each one of these guys that I put a love 'em tag on this week. And you need to be in a 14-team league or a 2-quarterback league in order to actually take advantage of my love pick here in Zach Wilson. The biggest reason that I don't think that Zach Wilson will live up to my love 'em tag that I have so lovingly gave him this week, since I could not decide which one I wanted to give one to ultimately, is his O-line versus Joey Bosa. We know from the past he does not handle pressure really well, and they lost more guys on their offensive line last week, so they're really banged up on their O-line. They did just bring up a little bit of help. That was a free agent guy who's just an experienced guy to help the team, but still, there you go. You can see the rest of the guys: Jimmy Garoppolo, Kenny Pickett, Tyson Bagent, Brett Ripien, PJ Walker, Jaron Hall. Hopefully we'll be able to get Matt Stafford in here, but I would probably have him somewhere right along, like maybe ahead of Kyler Murray if I were ranking him. That's off the top of my head. Now let's move on to my Week 9 DFS buys for the quarterback position. And for my not dirt cheap column, I'm going to give you a Dak Prescott this week at 6,500. My love him last week worked out, and I think this week going up against Philadelphia should be a pretty sweet matchup for him as well. In the cheapish categories, not quite super cheap here, but Derek Carr at $5,700, pretty darn cheap, and I like that. What was the matchup for Derek Carr? He's close to a love. I'm going up against Chicago. That's right. Should be a situation you can take advantage of. And in the bargain bin, I give you Bryce Young at $5,100. And if you need to save just a little bit more money, of course, you could go with my love him and Zach Wilson at $4,800. But I think I would, I have him in a totally different tier for a reason. I go with Bryce Young for just $300 more, most likely. That is it for my video. Thank you very, very much for tuning on in. Have a great week. I hope you had a good Halloween. Please like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you with my wide receiver video later on today. Peace out.